Hello and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today in this mini-series, where we're looking at the Qing Xin cultivar as we find it in different countries, as well as in slightly different forms, we are looking at Santikhiri Green Heart Oolong, which is from Curious Tea. This is the only one in this mini-series from Thailand, although it's the second tea, I believe, that we've looked at from Thailand. Now, this is Santikhiri Green Heart Oolong. Green Heart simply signifies it's Qing Xin. However, it also, in its own way, signifies that it's the tea as is. In other words, we're not looking at high oxidation and we're not looking at roasting or any sort of additional parameters. This is a lightly oxidized oolong. So we're looking at what we have in the past simply referred to as a green oolong. This one is from Thailand. So let's take a look at the packaging and the tea, and then we will get on with our two styles of steeping and reviewing. See you soon. This is Santikhiri Green Heart Oolong from Curious Tea. This is our next venture into Qing Xin cultivar teas that are grown further afield from Taiwan. Taking a look at the labelling and its symbolism, we have a green elephant up here. So that's the Thai aspect, as is this kind of boat here. And I'm not sure what landscape this is, but there seems to be a statue on top of some cliffs. The brewing parameters are relatively straightforward. It's an April 2025, so a mid-spring harvest. And reading the profile information, it's a lightly oxidized oolong from the highlands of Doi Mae Salong in northern Thailand. It produces a bright gold green liquor with a light vegetal and floral aroma. The refreshing flavour has a verdant floral profile with lightly astringent aftertaste. That's not quite a standard kind of flavour profile for a Qing Xin oolong. So let's take a look at the tea inside, and then let's give some serious consideration to our reviews of the tea to see where this is all coming from. Back in a moment. Here we are looking at the tea for the Santikhiri Green Heart Oolong from Curious Tea. The colour profile of these tea beads is a mixture of dark green and a much paler, almost kind of emerald green. In some instances, it's obviously stalk material. In some instances, it's the edging along some of these tea beads, but also, frankly, there are just one or two whole beads that are much paler. They're relatively standard in size. I'd say they were coming in at below 5 mil, maybe somewhere between 3 to 5 mils, or just under, so I don't contradict what I've just said. The scent of the leaves is cut grass and something sweet, with something slightly tart in the background, and without giving away any spoilers, that would certainly fit in with the suggested flavour profile for this tea. So let's move on now to our two reviews. See you in a mo. Welcome to the next part of our video, which is a teapot / Western style review of today's tea, which is Santikhiri Green Heart Oolong from Thailand, the vendor being Curious Tea. Now, the brewing parameters for the tea, I've gone back to what I think is a pretty good balance for this kind of greener oolong. 3.5 grams of tea, 150 mils of water, 3.5 minutes, 95 degrees centigrade. An interesting aspect from the flavour notes on Curious Tea is that this tea has an astringent quality. It's got some of that verdancy, the florality, the freshness of a green oolong, but whereas you might get something sweet, something fruity to kind of balance that, instead what there is a light astringency, and that certainly comes through on the brewing, just on the aroma on the brewing. In fact, it's almost got the tanginess of imagine you could have a goishi cha, or that Tibetan dark tea, I think it's Cloudline, which is, or the Ishizuchi Kurocha from Japan. All the ones where they've had a sort of lactobacillic fermentation process, where there's a real depth of tang. But imagine that with something much greener and much less darker in its flavour profile. Just going to move the kettle out the way slightly. There we go. Now, looking at the colour of these teas, I think they're pretty much the same. The one on the left, which is just the first steep, has more of a greeny quality. The one on the right, I think, is much more of a straightforward gold quality. I'm not sure whether either of them is more intense than the other. Now, some of the cream is coming through. Now it's cooling. There is cream in there, definitely. And a definite kind of freshness. I wouldn't be able to say whether it was floral or fruit in the background, but there's something there. Now this is slightly warm, it's not very warm. The astringent note is still not quite front and centre, but it's working together very well with it. I wonder if once it's cooled, yeah, it's already just starting to drop the intensity of that astringent note. So it's all working together. Right, let's pour some of this one out so it cools a bit better. And let's try our first steeping. It's mostly cream that's coming through. That is refreshing. Initially, your mind thinks, uh-oh, have I oversteeped this? But there's too much creaminess for that to be the case, and it's not drying. It just has a light astringency, plus the creaminess. Yeah. Mild cream, mild astringency now that I know what I'm smelling. Ooh. There's more body on that second steeping. Slightly more intensity on the astringency. But it's still not drying. I keep thinking it's going to be though. Let's try slightly more. Yeah. It's an astringency just all the way front to centre. I wonder if I'd brewed at a lower temperature, we wouldn't have quite so much, but it's not distracting. It all fits together very well. Especially on the first steep where there's still some cream. But the cream's washed out by the second steeping. Okay, I think we might actually drop that by 5 degrees for our Gongfu session. And just to see if we can bring out some of the cream, see if there's any more of the standard, if you want to put it that way, Qing Xin flavour aspects. We've got cream, let's see if we can't bring out any sweetness. Or anything kind of floral, something fresh, even if we don't get the sweetness. And see if that balances with the astringency. Very interesting, very refreshing. So let's move on to our Gongfu. Welcome to the last part of our video, which is our Gongfu session to review the Santikhiri Green Heart Oolong from Thailand, the vendor being Curious Tea. I've reduced the temperature of the water down to 90 degrees centigrade to see if that will reduce the astringency, which isn't unpleasant, but I can't help feeling it's not meant to be quite as prominent. Now, I was worried that 90 might slightly confuse the brewing times, but the beads, at least this particular sample I've got here, are all relatively small, and I feel that despite it being a lower brewing time, we might still not extend the steeping times in particular. So everything's been pre-warmed. We've got 3 grams of tea. It'll be 50 mils per steeping. The water's at 90 and everything is ready to go. So let's give that 40 and see where that gets us. I did notice when I was brewing this teapot style that the stalk material, it was absolutely massive amounts of stalk, at least very extensive bits of stalk, and they unfurled and re-steeped incredibly quickly. The tea took a second steeping for the leaves to unfurl anywhere near 100%, but the stalk material unfurled really, really rapidly. Right, so we're coming up to 45. Okay, not picking up anything in particular. We might just take it to 50 and go with some more frequent but shorter steepings. Okay, there we are at 50. Oh, something slightly vegetal. I think that's fair. I don't think we're picking up anything more complex than that. Colour-wise, it's a white tea silvery colour. I think that's spot on. And we're getting some of the creamy notes, but slightly, I want to say perfumey, but I'm wondering if that's what the astringency in a sense is meant to do. It's just meant to sort of stop that creaminess from becoming cloying. The stalk material, you might even be able to see that, has definitely started to hydrate, whereas the tea beads themselves are rock solid. So let's see what we get taste-wise. I'm expecting cream, but it's a question of how strong the astringency is. Cream, again, a slightly perfumey cream. It's not particularly astringent. In fact, you wouldn't say, oh, there's an astringent note, but it does add a slight, it does lift it. It is more refreshing, despite there being definitely some cream in there, slight dropping off, but that's only natural. It does lift it ever so slightly, gives it its character of its own. So here we are. This is going to be one of those teas where it will require more water just because the stalk is going to occupy so much of the gaiwan, at least by the time it's all thoroughly re-steeped. Okay. There is a slight creaminess on the palate, but again with a slight tang. That's really very interesting. Nothing there yet. We might need to take this a bit further because these leaves were really, really reluctant. So we're going to take this to maybe 55. I can't help feeling I don't want to play around with how long these steeps are. Right, that's definitely more intense colour. Ah, now there's that slight astringency again, but it does have a fruity note to it. That's what made me think of something like Goishi cha. It's more like the tang of rhubarb or something like that. Stewed fruit, but without the darker stewed fruit flavour. Yeah, it's there on the nose. But there is something leavening that. A bit of sweetness. Bit of sweetness. Maybe that's the floral or... yeah. Must be something floral. The stringency is front and centre again. What's the colour that time? I forgot to show you, sorry. That's a pale yellow. That's very drying. Interesting. Okay, so that astringency, even at a lower temperature, is definitely front and center. We're going to have to reduce these steeping times, I think. Maybe bring it in at 45. See what we get there, because that was really drying. See if a Schugel helps as well. Again, there's a kind of a stewed fruit aroma already, even with the lid on. Okay, again, that tang is there. I might do this at 40. Unless the problem we've got here is that you need the longest steeping time to get past the astringency. There's a bit, yeah, more stewed fruit, I think, than just tang there. That's probably good. Colour-wise, let's show you the colour this time. Very intense yellow, maybe with a slightly green edge. Now the leaf material, some of it's unfurling, some of it's still pretty solid. It might be time for a good deal of water there. There's a lot more roundedness to the flavour on the leaves, which are usually sort of, I find the dry leaf more kind of one-dimensional usually. I find the wet leaf, it has a kind of a coconutty edge and I can't really get anything past that. But there's definitely some kind of fruit behind the astringency. At least there is, there is there, not fruit, florals. There's definitely florals there this time. That's a lovely intense yellow. Right, let's see if we can manage florals on the cup. There's something perfumey there. I'm trying a retrohale there. There is something compromising that tang, but it is a very drying tea. That's not helping. Interesting. What we might do is add more water, which we'll need to do to give these room. We're going to try more water. That's almost 100, which I know seems a bit rash given the leaves were nowhere near that size. I just want to see if we can either dilute that tang down, see what's behind it, or just stop it being quite so drying, because that's getting in the way of whatever kind of florality the tea has. I'm not even really picking up the cream now. It doesn't have a lot of body. I'm just surprised at how drying that is, because we've been very careful with the steeping times. Bit of cream there. I'm wondering whether it was just too strong. Okay, 55. The tang's a lot milder there. I'm wondering if that's what the issue was. Just not enough water. The colour is greeny yellow there. That's pretty good. The astringency is there. And the leaves are tender, so they're now rehydrated. Okay, that's good. On the cup, a bit of astringency, a bit of sweetness. Now, Still drying. There is something slightly herbal. The astringency is more rounded now that it's more dilute. Yeah. It doesn't help that it's so drying so quickly, but there is something behind that astringency. Okay. But it is a very, nonetheless, even at the lower temperature, that's still a very drying tea. I think this wins on the Western. I can't say as I'm particularly enjoying this. The Western, you could say it was a slightly more rounded, more complex kind of Goishi cha, something like that. You could kind of embrace the tang, especially perhaps with a lower temperature. At the Gongfu, even with more water, controlling the steeping times carefully, lower temperature, it's just so drying. That's all I'm picking up. Really, that's kind of overtaking everything. And I can't say as that tang is a sufficiently rewarding experience. Gongfu, that is, to be worth pursuing. Okay, so definitely a Western, at least from my palate. And because you do pick up some of the extra elements, there's some of the Qing Xin kind of qualities. The Gongfu, they're not coming through. So this might be another one where I just say no to the Gongfu, but I'll include the video. I'll include this in the final video, so you can see, you can check my working, check my reasoning. So there we go. Very interesting. Another example of how Qing Xin varies depending on where it is. And I hope to see you for our next video. Happy steeping and God bless.